Hey everybody, we're going to get started in about 1 or 2 minutes. If you didn't get pizza or salad, there is salad. There's a lot of salad left. And there's lots of pizza. I think the rain scared off some folks. We had about 65 folks register, and so we ordered for more than will show up. This would be a good time for everyone to silence your cell phones, including me. Take your time, yeah. If anyone needs to use the restroom, exit the back door and go left. You'll see a sign for it. It's basically right there. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third meeting of the revival of the Chicago Cloud Computing User Group. My name is David. I work for Microsoft, so I guess that makes me your host today. I wanted to just thank you all for coming out on a rainy night here. I know it's tough to get out and brave the streets when it's really bad weather like this, and I'm sure you're going to learn something valuable. We've got a great presentation today, but coming out here, I want you to be aware that there's another opportunity beyond just learning technical content. You've got an opportunity to meet other people. So if you get a chance, I would really encourage you to meet somebody new, not just talk to the folks that you come with, and maybe get a business card or LinkedIn invitation or something like that. Make a connection and get to know other people. I think that's one of the real valuable things about user groups, and something that we lost during the pandemic when a lot of user groups went into hibernation and some never came out. So take advantage of that opportunity. I know I will. This group is made possible by a few folks. One is Eric Boyd and his company ResponsiveX. Eric is waving his hand in the back here. Not only is he a co-organizer of this group, but he also bought your dinner. Thank you very much. That deserves a big hand right there. Good pizza today. I said that deserves a good big hand right now. And April is with him as well. She's also one of the folks that's at ResponsiveX, who's been with the company for 125 years, which is a record, I think. I just want to introduce you to Mike Shelton. Mike is a good friend of mine. I've been with Microsoft almost 12 years, but 3 years ago I joined a new team, and one of the first people I met on my new team was Mike. And I quickly learned that Mike, if I had a question about data, about Fabric, about anything related to databases, data access, then he was the guy to call. And I've done so. I've taken advantage of that many times. So he's helped me out a great deal over the last 3 years. Thank you, Mike. He's extremely knowledgeable, and today he's going to share information about Microsoft Fabric. Please give a warm welcome to Mike Shelton.
Great, thanks, David. Everybody can hear me okay? We're good on the audio for the recording? Excellent. Well, thanks and welcome, as David said, for the folks that are went through the rain. I understand I was here all day, so I didn't get out in the rain, but hopefully folks did not get caught in the rain on the way over here today. So as David said, I'm going to talk about the opportunity related to data and artificial intelligence. It's going to be centered around technology that Microsoft has for Fabric. As David said, my name is Mike Shelton. I'm a solution architect in our partner organization focused on data and AI. So I work with partners, helping them realize the value and be able to leverage the technology that we have in solving problems with data architecture, artificial intelligence, and a variety of these types of scenarios. So just to get us started and just to help me sort of gauge the room, because there's a lot that we can talk about. We've got a short amount of time, and I want to be here all night talking about Fabric, even though it's something that I would enjoy doing. Just maybe by a show of hands, or if you want to speak out, it's great. Just kind of get a sense of, are you familiar with Microsoft Fabric in any way? A few folks? A little bit? Some quasi? A little bit? Okay, so about 30% will have some familiarization. Very good. So as I go through today, if you have questions, certainly feel free to interrupt me. If you have something to add, certainly, as David said, let's keep it collaborative, and feel free to add your comments as well, so that the folks in the group can all benefit from each other's shared experience. So we're going to talk here primarily about how Fabric can help us unify data for the AI opportunity that we have. And one thing that we want to keep in mind is that, AI is, I'm sure many of you or all of you have seen the interest and the buzz around artificial intelligence over recent time. And it's really driving a competitive advantage for many organizations. And when you look at the opportunity that we have with AI to really drive value for our organizations, there's a few things that need to be put in place. There's the algorithms, the infrastructure for AI themselves, but it's really about getting the data ready, right? If you look at AI is only as good as the data that you leverage for AI or that you feed into AI. And there's a couple of ways in which that may be the case. It might be leveraging data to build your own models. So if you're building your own machine learning models, the data that you would use to train those models in order to then do your own predictive analytics or your own analysis with those models. So you can have data that needs to be curated, prepared in order to then train and build those models. Or if you're leveraging some of the generative AI and you're using large language models or LLMs, you're going to have data that might augment the way you're using that. We would refer to that as RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. And the idea there is we're going to use our data because the LLMs are trained on the world's data, right? They don't really know anything about your organization or about your own data. So we use our own data to complement or supplement the prompts that we would then submit to the large language model in order to get answers that are more relevant or specific to what we are trying to do. And through that process, as I mentioned, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, we need to prepare our data and have that available to us in order to then submit that with the prompt. Now, when you think about what it takes to get a data estate in order for AI or for analytics or for other scenarios, there's a variety of tools and capabilities that exist that have been out there for quite some time. But one of the challenges that we have today is there's a variety of data copies that we may have in our organization. We may have challenges with the infrastructure that we have in order to assemble these pieces. We may have a variety of different systems that we're trying to unify the data across these systems. We're moving data around from one place to the next. There may be challenges with interoperability with various different services that we have. Your data may be inside of an application or application service. You want to bring that available to you in order to use that for these different architectures or scenarios. And you may have issues with potential exposure. If you don't know where your data is, you're not tracking your data, then it may be difficult to know if you have an exposure in the data that you have. And especially in scenarios where some of these, the way these LLMs are being, systems are being built, there may be data that you submit that maybe you didn't mean to, or you didn't realize that the LLM was gaining access to, and you want to make sure you're tracking all of that. So we want to take these considerations as we think about, okay, what are some of the factors that we want to go into to build this unified data estate in order to leverage AI to its fullest capacity. And if you look at this, and we're going to go into much more detail here throughout the evening, but we went from kind of that scattered state we just talked about to what might be a potential finished state. What is an ideal scenario that we're looking at? And an ideal scenario is where we have a variety of different experiences, applications, needs within our organization or our businesses that have a unified foundation for our data, and that data, regardless of where it's coming from, how it's being created or manifest, we have access to that data in a way that's persisted, it's governed, and it's also secure. So what we're going to do is spend the rest of our time together this evening talking about how Microsoft Fabric does that and how it addresses these scenarios. So if we think about that as a first step, let's talk about what we're really looking at. And when we talk about what Microsoft Fabric is, we talked about some of the challenges such as multiple analytical services. Again, various different organizations have grown with different systems. It may be departmental. It may be an organization has implemented one system and then they're transitioning into a newer system. So we end up with these multiple analytical services. And what we want to get to is a unified stack for our data that we can bring everything together. The other challenge we might have is we might have a variety of disconnected data sources. We might have data, as I mentioned, in various different applications. It might be in a SaaS data provider or a SaaS application. We want to be able to get at that data. We might want to unify that with a different application. So we want to think about how do we take and connect these various different disconnected data sources and bring that all together. Some of these data sources may be in a variety of different locations. Some of that data we might be able to move to unify. Some of that data we might have to, because of data size, data sensitivity, or other factors, want to keep that data where it's at. So the goal here is we want to unify all of our data in one place. And we're going to talk about how we can do that. We mentioned some of this idea of isolated applications. We have a variety of different tools, different systems. Sometimes it might be, I have this report, but I have this other report over here. I want to bring the two together to be able to leverage the unification of that data. So we're going to talk about how we bring everything together into the entire estate. And then we want to move from this idea of generative AI being bolted on to our data, or generative AI outside of our data, and where Gen AI is just part of the infrastructure or part of the platform that we have. And we're going to see how Microsoft Fabric does that. And when we look at what Microsoft Fabric brings together, it's really bringing together all of the assets that Microsoft has to offer into a single intelligent data platform. So the databases capabilities, the data stores, and these scenarios get brought together. The analytic capabilities all get brought together, as well as the AI services that we have in Azure in order to then bring all that together, provide governance over this infrastructure, and unify all of these different scenarios so we can leverage this for our generative AI solutions. So now getting into this in just a little bit more granularity, the one thing we want to talk about, when we talk about a complete analytics platform, as I mentioned, everything's unified. The other scenario, too, is we want to think about a variety of scenarios as low-code or no-code type of scenarios. We have the ability of doing code. We'll see some examples of that. But we also want to have tools that make it very easy for us to be very rapid in our deployment. And we want to think about cost savings and how we can unify the billing aspects. So we're going to see how that's done. But in a lot of scenarios today, you have these disparate tools. And the tools, one tool, your ETL or your data ingestion tool, might be costed a certain way. Your data storage or databases might be costed a different way. And you're not really seeing what the cost of everything is together because different tools are billed or spent, or excuse me, costed in different ways. And the other thing you're going to see as a theme as we talk about Microsoft Fabric is this idea of lake-centric and an open platform. We'll introduce in a little bit this idea of the one lake. And the idea here we're getting at is one copy of the data. So we're not copying data in multiple times in order to use it with different compute engines, different reporting scenarios. We want to unify all of that data and where we can create one copy of that. And then we want to keep it open at every tier. And we're going to see how Microsoft Fabric moves to more of an open infrastructure, leveraging open standards in a variety of different scenarios, and how that allows much greater interoperability with the tools that you may have or other types of capabilities that come down the road. And at the end of the day, we want to empower every business user. So we want to leverage familiar and intuitive interfaces, things that are built into Microsoft 365, and the goal is to go from insight to action as quickly as possible. And we're going to see various different ways that Fabric enables that. And as I mentioned, the AI scenarios and generative AI, we want to move to where we're leveraging co-pilot experiences within our data. We want to leverage the idea of this chat with your data type of scenarios, leveraging these various different generative AI type of situations. And we want to get to a point where we can use AI to be helping to drive the insights that we have within our data platform. So now really looking at what is Microsoft Fabric. Microsoft Fabric is a unified analytics platform and provides a variety of these scenarios or capabilities all as a single tool set. So if we start at the top, the first one that we have is the data factory. And what this is really our data ingestion, data transformation capability to allow us to pull data from a variety of different sources, leverage the various different transformation capabilities, and then land that data into, and we can see here in the middle, the One Lake. And we're going to talk much more throughout the evening about the One Lake. But that's what Data Factory is. It's evolution of the Azure Data Factory, now in Microsoft Fabric. Those capabilities here bundled within this entire platform. And then as we look at that, there's certainly data transformation capabilities that we would leverage within Data Factory as a graphical experience in order to do this data transformation. But we might want to do it more from a coding experience. We might want to leverage some of our data engineering skills, whether that's something in Python or leveraging Spark as a compute engine. Might be leveraging the various different SQL engines. So through the data engineering capability, we can leverage Spark, we can leverage the data warehouse, which is leveraging SQL against that data as well. So you might use something like Data Factory or another mechanism to land your data into Microsoft Fabric. And then if you want more of a coded experience, you could leverage the data engineering capabilities such as Python and Spark, SQL in the data warehouse to do your data transformation or other aspects that you may need to do to curate that data. And then now that we're starting to bring our data together and curate all of that data, now we may want to start to do additional analytics on that. That's where our data science workload starts to come in. We might want to use some of the machine learning libraries or some of the other capabilities that we get from a machine learning scenario in order to do additional work on that data. And that's where that data science comes in. Now up to this point, we've been talking about this idea of a batch mode or really loading data into persisting data in Microsoft Fabric, doing some work against that data, getting that prepared for using it downstream. But there's also this streaming scenario, and that's where the real-time intelligence comes in, where we may want to stream the data. It might be an IoT type of situation. It might be a logging type situation where the data is going to be coming in a constant stream. We want to load that as it's streaming in. We may want to react to that as events change or as data hits certain thresholds. We may want to respond to that versus landing it and then doing a report, seeing that after the fact. As the data is streaming in, we want to be able to respond or see what's going on. And that's where the real-time intelligence capabilities in Microsoft Fabric come together. And then now that we've prepared our data, curated our data, we have it available to us. And that's where Power BI, as our interactive data visualization tool, comes into play, where we can now leverage that data that we have in Fabric. And now we can start to interact with that data, review it, report on it, and so on. Now, one thing that's interesting as well, and you see on the far right side here of the slide, this idea of partner and industry workloads. So not only do we have the personas or these capabilities that are part of Microsoft Fabric, but there's also the ability for Microsoft partners to extend the capabilities through what we call workloads, in which a company, a partner, can build these capabilities that show up inside of Microsoft Fabric. So that way you potentially as a consumer, besides the personas that are built in, might have an additional capability that you could then leverage, and then that gets paid for through that vendor scenario. So those are those personas that we have now. Across all of those, we have Copilot built into Fabric, and then all of the data centered around the One Lake. And then the data in One Lake, and I'm going to get into much more detail on this as well, is really that area. Think of that as a data lake that's managed and governed as a single entity across all of the different compute scenarios that we have. And then Microsoft Purview as that governance engine. So let's take this a step further and let's start looking at some of these scenarios. Now, we talked about some of the deficiencies that we have in having a disconnected environment. And then one of the challenges that we've mentioned earlier is that the variety of tools, this is just a sampling of all the tools that you may choose from. And the idea is to get away from all of these independent, disparate tools and get to that single, unified experience. So when you look at Microsoft Fabric, again, the idea is to empower every data professional with the right tools. So we're really talking about whether it's a data engineer, a data scientist, your analyst. It's really about providing the various different tools. And the thing to keep in mind is that Microsoft Fabric is delivered as a SaaS platform or software as a service. So even when you look at cloud deployments or platform as a service scenarios, this takes it a step further. So much of the infrastructure and those scenarios that you'd have to manage on your own are all handled for you, where now you really start to get into digging into the benefits of working with your data without having to start to think about even infrastructure from a cloud perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, managed, secured, and governed all within Fabric. We're going to talk about some of the end-to-end security, the governance capabilities that are provided. And this idea of a simplified building and unified compute is important. So Fabric is delivered as software as a service. And then I mentioned earlier about you could have your ETL tool, and it has its own cost model. You have your data storage, has its own cost model. Your visualization tool has its own cost model. Fabric has a unified building and compute experience. Everything is all shared on the same capacity. And we're going to see the different compute scenarios. So whether you're using the real-time intelligence or using Spark or using the data warehouse or even Power BI for that matter, you're paying for that and it's built at a single capacity level across all of those different compute scenarios. So you don't have to worry about, am I over-provisioning in one piece but under-provisioning in another, and really how do I balance all of that out? And then there's tools to help you see your usage and help you size and make sure you have the right capacity as you go forward. So again, these are the different scenarios or personas. If we get into that in just a little bit more detail, we start to see where these different capabilities start to be leveraged. The data engineers are probably going to be using your data factory, your data engineering capabilities. Your data scientists, as well as the data warehousing, sort of blends in or overlaps a little bit. Data scientists might be using the data warehouse scenarios or capabilities, as well as the data science workload. Again, these are going to be Spark notebooks that you're going to be leveraging from these different types of situations. Your data analysts or business users could be leveraging the real-time intelligence, getting that stream of data, being able to react and interact with that directly. And then your business users with Power BI. We're going to talk about some of the co-pilot experiences as we go on, but then your data stewards are going to be leveraging OneLake and Microsoft Purview to ensure that you have the data sets, the data models that you're going to need for these different personas. So if we just walk through one quick example, in this case, a retail example of how this might look. We're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of shortcuts, but you think of here, we're going to take a shortcut. Basically, we're virtualizing our data into the OneLake. Helps us manage data duplication, ensuring that we have efficiency in our data storage and our data management. And then we bring that into OneLake, and then through the various different data ingestion or through data warehousing, this is where your data engineers would work with that data, transform that data, leveraging either Spark or leveraging the data warehouse. And again, it could be leveraging that data factory from a graphical experience to transform that data. We also have the ability then from a data science perspective of using those notebooks, using the machine learning libraries in order to interact with the data that we have, creating those additional data sets, making those available downstream. We may also have that real-time analytics or the observability scenario, whether it's from a logging, web logs, system logs, POS data, as it's mentioned here, bringing that data in and being able to react to that as well. We have a capability called Data Activator that you can then set alerts on your data so that as the data is coming in, if it hits a certain threshold, being notified of those situations and that scenario from there. And then lastly, from a business intelligence perspective, being able to visualize and interact with that data across the board. So all of these scenarios are all delivered within Microsoft Fabric. And then we drill into that manage and govern and secure just a little bit more. The idea here is, again, as a single platform, and I'll show you in a demo what some of this looks like. The admin portal is where you go in to basically govern and manage the assets that you have within Microsoft Fabric. We have this idea of a tenant, and then the scope of object management is at what we call a workspace level. So there's different settings that you can control at the entire tenant level, or settings that you would control at an individual workspace level. And then those capacities that I mentioned earlier, you would assign a workspace to a capacity, and that capacity in which you scale up or down would be then the compute resources that you have across all of the different compute engines that you have within inside of the capability. And then the ability of leveraging, yes, question?
Mike, one question about the tenant settings.
Yep.
So now with Data Fabric, we can actually specify where my data is going to reside. Is that correct? Because with right now with Power BI and in a non-data lakes scenario,
Right.
I don't really control where my data is going to reside. It's just based on where the home address of your company is.
Right. Yes.
So now I can override that and say, okay, I want this to reside in East Zone.
So it's not so much overriding it, but yes, you have control over where the data is being stored. And then what you're referring to, I'm imagining based on what you described, is using the in-memory models when you're using the Power BI service, which is going to be dependent on where that infrastructure is deployed. Here, as you look at the data lake, and then there's some technology I'm going to talk about called a direct lake, where we're accessing it directly from where it's stored, and then the repository is stored based on where the workspace is. And then that's where what region, so if it's region specific, as far as a locale or geolocation, you do have control over where that sits, yes. Yeah?
When you had the logos of all the different apps that they can talk to, I couldn't read it because it was too many.
That's right.
But I just want to make sure I understand this. Example, so let's say a company is keeping all their file shares in Box or one Dropbox or Ignite.
Yep.
Can this then talk to it and then able to mine it for data
So,
without duplication?
so it depends on where it's stored. So we can connect to S3 compatible storage. So if it's in Box, then you may not be able to get it actually through the Box service. But if it was in an S3 compatible storage, I've got some content you'll see a little bit later, but I can do AWS S3, GCP file storage, or GCP blob storage, or their cloud storage, or even shortcut to Azure storage or blob storage or ADLS Gen 2. So those you can. So it depends on the service and the accessibility to it. So if it's behind something like Box, probably you wouldn't have it accessible as S3 compatible, like an open storage. So in that case, likely not. But if it was somewhere, one of these other ones I mentioned, then yes, you would be able to, and you would not have to copy the data. And then we'll get into that a little bit more, but then the next question is, okay, what about performance and the efficiency? There are caching that can occur under the covers there to help the efficiency, and also from a cost perspective, so you're not doing egress from, say, other clouds, as an example, in that situation. But it really is going to depend on where that data is. But essentially, you're not copying the data and then having to refresh the data in order to keep that up to date. So yeah. Excellent. Any other questions? Great. Well, if they do, just let me know. We'll keep addressing them as we go through. So from a security perspective, security is critical. Data encryption, workspace and item level security, fine-grained security and access controls are throughout the various different systems. Data residency, that answers the question as far as like where the data sits, a little bit different than what you might be familiar with today. Conditional access within the environment as well. So those capabilities are there. And then when you look at that encouraged data discovery and then trust, that's where Microsoft Purview would come in. That's where the One Lake Data Hub comes in, where if you have different assets, you'll be able to find these assets within inside of the environment. You can do things like endorsements, or you're sort of identifying data that's certified to be used within the organization. So that's endorsed for you to use depending on the scenario. Lineage examples inside of Microsoft Fabric. Metadata curation is an example, discover and reuse. So the idea is as you're bringing all this data together in these various different data sets, making it available so that way you can find it within Fabric, and now it's not simply if you happen to know where it's at and bringing it in. And then certainly from a monitoring perspective, admin monitoring, there's capacity metrics I mentioned earlier, so you can see the capacity of your environment so you can scale and understand what's being used, see if you need to scale up or scale back or what have you, as well as the Purview Hub for being able to look at your assets as well. In addition, so think of the Purview Hub potentially as in addition to the One Lake Data Hub. So there's some things that you get within Microsoft Fabric that are just part of the platform, and there's some things you get as an extension by leveraging Purview on top of Fabric itself, okay? Which we see here. All right, and then just quickly talking about this idea of the compute. And this is going to become much more relevant as I talk about the One Lake and the various different compute in more granular level of detail. But you think of these different personas. So Data Factory in Azure Synapse runs independent. The data engineering, if you ran Spark, would run independent. The data warehouse, Synapse Data Warehousing runs independent. The data science workloads, which is typically Spark Notebooks, again, as I just mentioned, independent. Real-time intelligence in Azure, outside of Fabric, would be Azure Data Explorer, or what we call ADX. Now, and then Power BI would run independent in their own compute. And now, with Fabric, everything comes together, and it's that single storage area that we talked about, as well as that single compute that brings everything together. So let's just kind of move on here. So getting into a little bit more detail on this idea of the data lakes. When we think about some of the challenges that we have with data lakes, the idea of a data lake is one place to store all of our data, right? You think of how data lakes first came in comparison to where we had data warehouses. The idea of a data warehouse was we had structure. You needed to load your data into a structured schema data model. If it didn't fit that data model, then you typically didn't load that data, and maybe you discarded it. But there was value in that data, so you want to keep that data. So data lakes where there's no schema, there's no structure, just dump all your data inside the data lake. Well, maybe that's not very easy to find, very efficient for leveraging that from an analytics perspective. So we want to sort of manage through that various different scenario, and that's where we start to see this idea of, even though the data lakes were lower cost, we could load all of our data, but now we start to get into this scenario of silos. Various different departments might have their own data. They might start to curate the data in their own way, start to get data duplication, and which brings its own challenges and own scenarios that we want to think about how we address that. So that's where the idea of the One Lake for data, or what we call the OneDrive for your data, comes into play. Again, this is really about unifying. When you think about the OneDrive for your documents, that's where we think about the One Lake, but for your data. So the idea is to connect the data across your multiple data sources, even multi-cloud, as we just mentioned, through these shortcuts. You want to work on that same copy of data across all the data engines. You'll see some graphics and some slides coming up, but that's really important to think about. Today, if I want to do data analysis leveraging Spark, I would load that data into that engine's data store, whatever that might be, and then I would process, query, interact with that data. If I want to do querying in a SQL experience, I would load that into a relational database, data warehouse of some sort. That's being duplicated and then copied over there. We talked about Power BI in-memory models. If I want to build a semantic model in Power BI and leverage the performance capabilities of Power BI, I'm going to load that into Power BI. And now I've got that data maybe in another repository, in this case in a memory scenario. The idea here is all of the data is persisted in the one lake, and then all of these compute engines I've been talking about, the Spark, the real-time intelligence, the data warehouse, can all access that same data inside of the one lake, and then the engines can use those across each other, so I don't have to move or reduplicate that data in order to use it in Spark because it was stored in my data warehouse. And again, you'll see some images of that here in just a moment. And then lastly, the idea of democratizing data access. Because we're in one lake, we're all in the same location. Data discovery, sharing, governance, and compliance become much easier. So here's an example of that. This will build out a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But you think of it, as I mentioned earlier, we have the various different compute engines and the various different ways that we would today interoperate with the various different data elements that we have. So whether it was a relational database or Spark, different languages, different constructs. But now what we're doing is we're bringing all of that together into this idea of this unified experience. And these ideas of these shortcuts, so you see on the bottom it says the multi-cloud shortcuts. I can shortcut into the data. Again, that's where the data stays where it's at. And then I just access the data, and then I would build tables on it. I would do ETL on it if I wish, transform the data into a variety of different ways, and then leverage these shortcuts. Again, S3 compatible. There's shortcuts for Azure, Dataverse, Google, Amazon. So that's S3 in AWS, or S3 compatible storage scenario. So that's where, with a shortcut, we're leaving the data where it's at, and we're just sort of creating a link to it and then connecting to it. The other idea is mirroring. Now, what mirroring is doing is it's actually copying the data into Fabric. So in this case, you see some examples of Cosmos DB or Azure SQL Database. We can do mirroring with Snowflake. We can do some mirroring of some elements with Databricks, the Unity Catalog as an example. And in this case, the idea of mirroring is where we're actually taking a copy of the data and bringing it into Fabric. So instead of you having to set up a CDC or change data capture type of environment, leveraging an ETL tool, it could be Data Factory as an example, this is all done for you. And now it's in near real time bringing that data into Microsoft Fabric for you to be able to leverage. And I mentioned a few of the data sources already. There's growing a set of these data sources. And now in this case, it's actually copying the data over. And now in some other cases, we decide whether we want to do a shortcut or we want to do mirroring, depending on what the data source is and what you're trying to achieve with that data. Okay. Yeah.
So with regards to the mirroring, and if I'm trying to replicate unstructured data into the data lake, do I need to maintain those column level mappings, or is it just going to discover that and build that association on its own?
So if you're doing unstructured data, you would need to build the mappings in that sense. When you say unstructured, it would really look at, is it semi-structured? Is it truly unstructured? Like if it's a document, a PDF, or something like that, then you're going to be doing that. And we'll talk through that a little bit later. In that scenario, you would probably be using some of the AI services, like Azure OpenAI with document intelligence, in order to crack those documents, to parse that out into a semi-structured or structured model that you would then use for downstream and other uses. And that is something that is accessible from within Fabric, within that data science. There's a library called Synapse ML that allows you then to call out to the ML services within Azure, and to crack documents that way is the way that you would approach it. If it's something where it's a CSV or a JSON document, then those have some structure to it. And then there may be some ways that you can leverage that structure in order then to do some reporting or analysis downstream. Okay, excellent. All right, let's move on here a little bit. So one thing to keep in mind that's just quickly to touch on in Fabric is we have this idea of domains. You can tag data as a data domain. So if you want to tag certain data for, say it's finance data, or if it's sales data, or whatever that might be, this is a way of getting into some of the data, data like a data mesh kind of idea with data domains, and being able to implement some of those pieces there. And then this talks about where we were talking about the geolocation of the data. It's all based on the workspace. So when you establish a workspace, based on the location of that, that's where that data is going to be persisted. And then this is what I wanted to get to as far as like that engine store, and then how are we achieving these various different capabilities or scenarios. So as I mentioned, from an open perspective, and I mentioned the OneLake, so all of the data in Fabric is stored into OneLake as Parquet files. So Parquet is a column compressed file format, and it uses Delta tables to provide that structure on top of the Parquet files. So Delta is an open format, and we have capabilities coming in more scenarios where we support Iceberg as well. So if you look at the different table formats, if you will, that are on top of Parquet, Iceberg, there's 3, Hudi, Iceberg, and Delta. And then Iceberg is supported by a variety of different services. Snowflake, as an example, leverages Iceberg. Databricks leverages Delta tables, and now Iceberg in a variety of different ways. And we can support both of those scenarios. So the native format's Delta tables on top of Parquet, but Iceberg is something that can be supported as well. So we talked about, as an example earlier, mirroring. You can mirror Snowflake data into Fabric, and then maybe you want to do Power BI reporting on top of that. Or if you're using Snowflake, say in Azure, writing out to Iceberg tables, you'd be able to connect to those directly and not have to mirror and then do your Power BI reporting from that scenario as well. Okay. Question?
Is Iceberg going to be at the same level as the Delta support, or is it going to be a projection?
Is Iceberg going to be at the same level as Delta?
Native at that level, or is it going to be still going to be Delta under the covers and then projection to Iceberg?
No, I forget the name of the bridging technology that's used between Iceberg and Delta. I can look at that.
There is going to be some.
Well, I don't think it's Delta on top of Iceberg. There's a component in there that kind of bridges that Iceberg. I forget what that piece is. I can get you some more detail on that, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But I don't believe it's Delta like mapped into Iceberg, but there is a component that allows that translation. Yeah, I'll have to follow up. Excellent. So it's really this Delta table. So what's great about this is now it's an open format. So if you can read or write Delta tables, you don't need one of the compute engines in Fabric as an example. Right? So we have examples. So as I mentioned, I work with partners. I work with partners that are ingesting data into Fabric directly into the OneLake and putting that as Delta tables. We have open mirroring, which you can build your own mirroring solution. So if you wanted to write code and do mirroring out of your own application, as an example, into Fabric, excuse me, these are things that you can do in order to then ingest data into Fabric. And then again, because it's using the Delta tables on Parquet, then you can load those in there. Or if you have processed data using that, then you can read it from there as well. So we get great interoperability, say with Databricks and with Fabric. So if you're using Databricks for data processing, you're writing them as Delta tables, we can read those directly, say, into Power BI or directly into, say, the data warehouse or whatever it might be, and mix and match those different scenarios together. And then this is just highlighting what we've already talked about, the fact that all of the different compute engines are really just accessing that same data. So if I'm using the what we now call the event house, or what was Azure Data Explorer in the real-time intelligence, that can go out to Delta tables into OneLake. And then if I want to query that through the data warehouse or leverage Spark to do some data processing, I would be able to do that as well. And I don't have to ETL the data out of, say, the event house into a repository for Spark or into the data warehouse. Okay. And then this is just a quick example of what a screenshot of the OneLake Data Hub looks like. But what I want to get into, and how do we take this or extend this to that next level, is really around the data analytics pieces. Excuse me. So when you look at, now that we've brought in our data, we've curated our data, and we want to make it available for our business users in order to leverage that, whether they're frontline workers, data analysts, the C-suite, or what have you, we bring all of that in order to help us make better decisions. And this is all driven through the Power BI experience. So now Power BI that we have can source data from the data warehouse or the lakehouse, which is that Delta format that we would leverage within the Spark experience. And everything that now we're familiar with from a Power BI perspective is available to us, and then exposing that into a variety of different end scenarios or end uses for our business users. But what's additionally interesting, and this is what we're talking about, the difference in that the in-memory mode that we have within Power BI today. So Power BI is an in-memory data model. You would load data, say, from your data warehouse in order to do your interactive analytics, very fast, very performant. Now we have this, if you look in the bottom of the slide here, this idea of this direct lake mode. And the idea of the direct lake mode is now we have these tables, Delta tables in Parquet, column compressed in the OneLake. Now Power BI can read those natively, and I don't have to process the semantic model in Power BI in order to make that available to me. And now, as I'm loading data into the Parquet Delta tables, now they're available for my Power BI environment, and then those would reside on wherever I define my workspaces. And this is a pretty significant advancement when you think about, okay, now I don't have to duplicate my data, I don't have to process, so I have very large data I'm going to have interactive analytics on with Power BI and these sorts of things. This is where something like the direct lake mode comes in and provides some significant benefit or value. And then lastly, from an interactive perspective or from a visualization experience, this idea of taking action on the data. This is through the real-time intelligence. Again, where I mentioned how we can set alerts on various different thresholds within the data and then be able to respond to that or see how that's changing through time. And then before I show a little bit about what the Microsoft Fabric looks like, just touching more on this idea of AI. So again, accelerating productivity with Copilots in Fabric. So the variety of different experiences I talked about have Copilot built in. The AI-driven insights you get through Power BI. And then this idea of the generative AI on your data. And that's where we talked about earlier, is leveraging the services within Azure, the machine learning services, So it could be Azure OpenAI or the other ML services that's available to us in order to do that right on the data that we have inside of Microsoft Fabric. So it could be doing sentiment analysis. It could be doing like a RAG type application. There's a capability that we have in Microsoft Fabric that we call the data agent, where you build these agentic applications on data in Fabric, and you're building an agent, if you will, sort of coaching the agent through prompts. So, and then it exposes that as a REST endpoint or a REST API that you can include in your application. So when you need to go after structured data, say from a RAG application perspective, then that's available to you through that scenario, as opposed to maybe you're using Azure AI Search today for your unstructured data. Now you can mix and match that to fit the appropriate needs. And then lastly, Copilot in Microsoft Fabric across all of the different personas, as I mentioned a minute ago. So just quickly, and then I'll show some of what Fabric looks like in a quick demo. When you think about your journey to AI and leveraging your data platform, first thing you want to do is establish, as we mentioned, a central repository for all your data. You want to think about preparing your data for that AI innovation. That's where we look at the various different data transformations we might do, whether you're using Spark, Python, you're using SQL, the data warehousing experience, and these sorts of pieces. And then that integration, here it says Azure AI Studio, which is now Azure AI Foundry, in order to then make that available to your AI applications, whether it's a RAG application or you're going in the inverse where you're calling out to Azure OpenAI from within Microsoft Fabric in order to leverage the services in order to curate and work with your data. And then really quickly, just an example of some of the links that you can use to get started. This blog is fantastic. Microsoft Fabric, let me just ask quickly, so folks kind of raised their hands in the beginning, those that are familiar with or not familiar with Microsoft Fabric. Let me ask that same question again, but in this time, say Power BI. How many of you are familiar with, aside from Fabric, just using Power BI itself? Okay, much more of a group in the audience that's using Power BI. So if you've leveraged Power BI for some period of time, you'll be familiar with the rapid innovation that Power BI goes through or has gone through in its inception and how it rapidly innovates. Microsoft Fabric is following that same trajectory. Rapid innovation in the services, rapid innovation in the capabilities. So this blog is fantastic to keep up with the innovation that's happening, the new capabilities, many pieces coming out in preview that you can experience and that you can explore on your own. The things that become GA or generally available get announced there. Different ways of using Fabric in different personas. So there's some really, really great content in the blog that I would encourage you to take a look at. And then certainly you can try Microsoft Fabric yourself and get going with that and see how that is. So with that, let me, I just want to, the demo I have prepared is just a, excuse me, walk through a bit of what Fabric looks like. There's so much, and if there's some interest in the group here, to have myself or others come back to do a deep dive in some of these different areas. Tonight was really just to sort of position the basis of getting started with Fabric itself as a platform. And with that, bring this over. Get orientated on my mouse. So this is the home screen for Microsoft Fabric. This is, again, much like you'll be familiar with for the folks and the additional folks that raised their hand from a Power BI perspective. This is what Microsoft Fabric, this evolves. If you look at some of the videos that are in the various different conferences that we've had, or videos that are on the various different scenarios showing Fabric earlier, the experience starts to look a little bit different as it continues to evolve. So it's something that you want to continue to keep up with or keep looking at. But you start here, you have your home. Workspaces, I mentioned workspaces. You can have n number of workspaces. So if I were to look at the workspaces, that's what you would see here. The real-time intelligence I mentioned earlier, you can monitor. So it's very quick access to see the variety of these different resources that you have. The workloads, if I were to click here, again, you get a sense, that's where I talked about those partner applications or those partner scenarios that you could deploy into your own Fabric tenant. Would be something that you could take a look at from that perspective. And here's what a workspace looks like. So this is a sample of VentureWorks. If you're familiar with the VentureWorks database, you'll see what this is in this workspace. So I have a workspace that I've called VentureWorks, and I have a couple of assets here. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice as the night goes on. So I mentioned this idea of using Spark for data transformation. When you create a repository or a data set in Spark, what you're doing is you're creating what's called a lakehouse. That gets instantiated here. When you create a lakehouse, you get by a default semantic model. So this would be a Power BI model that, based on what you created in the lakehouse, shows up right away. And then you get, in this case, what we call a SQL endpoint. So going in a little bit more detail, the lakehouse is all driven off of Spark. You have a data warehouse, which is, you think of Azure SQL Data Warehouse as an example. You have that as a separate item type entity. But on top of the lakehouse, which is using Spark as an engine, potentially Python, as an example for doing your data transformation, creating your tables or what have you, you get a SQL endpoint. Now that SQL endpoint is read-only against the lakehouse, but that allows me to connect to it with anything that can connect to SQL. So I can use Power BI to connect to it. I don't have to, but I could use Power BI to connect to it. I could use SQL Server Management Studio to connect to it. I could use Azure Data Studio to connect to it, and it's a read-only T-SQL interface to that lakehouse. So the lakehouse I created, instantiated with Spark. I have my tables there, which is all Delta with Parquet under the covers there. But now I have a SQL endpoint, so anything that can talk to SQL. So if you have another tool, if you have an application that you've built that can connect to a SQL server, it can connect to that endpoint, and you just get that. You don't have to do anything. That's just out of the box. And I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like here in just a moment. This is just an example of a SQL data agent. This is an example of a notebook. Pretty straightforward there. But just to highlight then, so let's say I want to create a new item. So again, I talked about these various different items that I have here, and this is where you start to see some of these growing capabilities from a Microsoft Fabric perspective. So I can get data. So I have my data flows. Event stream is that streaming scenario that would go into the real-time intelligence. Data flows, a data pipeline. So if you're familiar with Azure Data Factory and you haven't used them in Fabric, very similar concepts and constructs from that perspective. But if I wanted to create a mirror database from Cosmos DB, which is currently a preview capability, you'll see that show up, and then you'll be able to leverage that. I could work with, again, here, a notebook, which would be my Spark notebook. I could create a Spark job definition. So you see everything here, and then all of these assets that I would create would then show up in my workspace, and then I could apply permissions at a workspace level, and then I would then have segregation within my tenant with the various different workspaces that I have here. Data agents, machine learning models. So there's a lot here that we could drill into more details. If the group was interested to get more detail on just doing data warehousing or just doing data science work, or how we might do a little bit more from an AI perspective, I've got some notebooks where I'm calling out to Azure OpenAI to crack PDF to be able to chunk the document, store that data back into a table, which could be an approach that you might go with. Again, you could use Azure AI Search on top of the data and use that as your query engine for your various different applications from that perspective. So a lot of scenarios that we can leverage here. A few things that are sort of maybe a bit newer that if you're doing traditional data warehousing or some of these analytic systems in the past, as an example, GraphQL built into some of the different data experiences. We have this new capability. It's a user data function where you can write your own code. It's Python, but you can write your own code and then call that from a notebook, call it from a pipeline as well, so that you can do some reusability with your code from that perspective there. And then just to sort of close out, and then we can wrap up and open for questions or just some interactive dialogue. As Dave was mentioning, for folks to get to know some of your colleagues here and build your network. I just wanted to just quickly show, I'm here. So this is what the SQL endpoint looks like against that lakehouse. So this is the lakehouse. So again, this is all was created by Spark. This is a query that I used, Copilot. I'm going to show you the prompt that I used to create this. Here, again, it looks kind of or very much like the data warehouse. I've got my schemas, my tables in here, because again, this looks to me as a SQL endpoint. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Copilot built in to the experience. I could come into Copilot, and I can come in here and say something like, show me total. If you're familiar with the AdventureWorks data model, and then this would go off and figure out. Now again, I didn't give it any prompt as to what my schema is, what my data attributes are. It was able to infer that because I'm connected to the data model. I can look at this, and then I can choose to have that. It won't just run it. I'm going to look at it first, make sure it's correct, and then I can copy that into and run it. And this is what this query was that you see here. I just had generated this earlier. So everything that you're seeing here, everything I showed you is all done through the browser. I can do all of this work creating user data functions, creating the data pipelines, creating everything through the browser. There's also VS Code extensions. So through the data science, we have something we call Data Wrangler, which is sort of like, think of it like Power Query for the data scientists. If you're familiar with that in Power BI, it generates Python code, a graphical interface for doing data exploration, data cleaning from that sense. But that's all can be done in the browser here. But there's also a VS Code extension. There's a VS Code extension for Fabric. There's a VS Code extension for SQL Server. It's a MS SQL is the extension. And that particular extension ties into GitHub Copilot. So if you want to do that for using that to help generate code or go through that, that can connect to the SQL endpoint, and you would be able to use that as well. So there's a Fabric extension. There's a Data Wrangler extension. So if you wanted to do some of this in a pro code experience, you have that available to you in VS Code as well. So with that, that's what I had as far as prepared content. Happy to take any questions, any dialogue, or if we want to wrap and kind of just have some interactive time at the end here. But thank you so much for the time. Thank you for the opportunity to come and share some of this with you. And like I said, let David or Eric know if you want a deeper dive in some of these areas. We can certainly facilitate going deeper into each of these various different personas for Microsoft Fabric. Yeah.
Can you show the migration of tenants? Say you're migrating this from central to east?
Well, you wouldn't migrate the tenant. So when you create the tenant, it's very similar to Power BI in that sense. You're going to get that home area. What you would do is you would create a new workspace. Is I believe what you're after when you're saying where the data sits. It's going to be where you create the workspace. And the workspace will be associated to the capacity. The capacity is created in Azure. When you go into Azure, you're going to actually create a capacity. It's called an FSKU. And then there you're going to choose the region where you want that to run. And then that's how that gets associated. So it's not moving a tenant around. So tenant is very much in Fabric, much like a Power BI concept. But yeah, but that's how you would do it.
Can you show the workspace where you have this associated with capacity? Maybe that would help.
Sure. So yeah, so if I go here, workspace settings, where did my capacity go? General. I moved it on me. Oh, here, sorry, license info. Oh, no. It should be right here.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well,
Yeah.
let me look at it while we're wrapping up, and I find that they must have.
So I alluded to this when I was presenting last month, but we were talking about building kind of distributed systems at scale and offloading some of the work out of the transactional system into like data warehousing, medallion architectures. And so that's where we use Microsoft Fabric a lot, and where we find a lot of value is taking all of that transactional data from other systems, bringing it together, getting the load off of the transactional system, and then optimizing the analytical system as well. And so that's one of the great use cases for us, where we use Fabric a lot with customers. The other thing, I didn't see you crack open a notebook. Maybe you did and I missed it.
No, I did not.
Okay.
I could do
So-
that, but I did not
so
open one.
One of the things that I think is really interesting and cool here as well is that Fabric builds on, oh yeah, mics. Good call. I'm generally pretty loud, but it's not going to be in the recording. Yeah. So one of the things that I think is cool about this product and several other products at Microsoft is it leverages PySpark and Python under the covers, which is, a lot of people don't even realize that there are a lot of Python Software Foundation people at Microsoft that work at Microsoft.
Right.
And so it's pretty cool to see those kinds of, several years ago, there was that whole Satya on stage saying, Microsoft loves Linux. But it's not just Linux, it's, things like Python and stuff like that too, which is cool. Did you talk about pricing at all? Like how the benefits of the pricing?
Yes, about
Okay.
the FSKUs and then the single capacity.
Yep, okay.
Yep. Yeah,
That's
that
cool.
we touched on. And then just real quick, since you mentioned it, it was literally like right in front of our eyes. It just changed the screen a little bit. Now it's an edit versus it was on the bottom. But you see here my capacity. I'm running an F2, which is the smallest capacity you can have. So like an F64 is familiar to like what your current, some of the Power BI that you may have today. And I'm in the West US 3. That's the region where I'm at. So that's how I'm tying my where my capacity is.
There used to be some needs for F64, but they've reduced those recently.
Yeah.
So there's less and less of a need for F64, which is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. So when the AI services were first come out, or some of the other services, it required an F64 at a minimum, and now they're starting to lower some of those requirements. So I'm able to do the AI pieces directly with the FSKU, or with the F2, which is the lowest cost.
Yeah, right.
Slowest, but the lowest cost. But great for these scenarios.
And that trial, I don't know if it still works like this, but that trial like gives you the option, or has for a long time, to just keep extending that guy. Like you wouldn't do it for production scenarios,
Right.
but for your dev scenarios, you can just keep extending that trial and keep tinkering with it for a while, which is kind of nice.
Yes.
I don't know if they finally fixed that glitch, but
I'm not sure. You see, mine says my trial ends in 28 days, but this is actually on an actual capacity. So, the FSKUs are really pretty low cost as far as like dev work or experimentation or trial. And I'm not sure, like, I haven't tried to do the re-extend, but I know that was something. But the trial is equivalent to an F64 is my understanding, as far as like what you're getting from the trial edition.
yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Could I get you to browse to a couple of things in your browser?
Maybe.
It'll be okay. Microsoft will allow it. It'll be
Okay.
fine.
You bet.
Could I get you to browse to aitour.microsoft.com?
You betcha.
Not sure we allow that.
It depends. Yeah. Yeah. When I was in Europe recently, I took photos because in Europe, all the books at the bookstore say IA. When I was in France, and so the way they structure the language and sentences and stuff like that, all the books in the bookstore were IA everywhere. I was like, information architecture, like that's so like 2010 or something, right? But it's intelligence artificielle. So it's confusing at first. So I took photos. There we go. So can you click Find Your City? I'm going to let you guys in on something that's not widely known yet. See over here on the left-hand side, Chicago, McCormick Place, September 25th. This is a cool event. I helped out early in the year in January at the event in New York City. It was a blast. So it's a one-day event. It's free, but it is like a gated entry, and it will sell out. Sell out for free, something like that. So if you click on the Explore Now, you don't have to click on it here, but when you're registering, if you're curious, you can come in here and you can say register, request to attend. There are humans actually that look at the registrations for the AI tour of all things. You think this would be just AI, but there are humans that look at this and determine whether they allow you in or not. I don't know what they look for. But if you register sooner than later, you probably have a better shot because it will most definitely sell out. It did in New York at the. I will probably be helping out in the booths at least, but maybe speaking as well, doing a lightning talk or something like that. So it'll be fun. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I registered earlier today, and it said, don't make any plans, don't get your hotel room. We can't confirm you, but it does ask, do you have a special code?
Yes. I get that question a lot. So the question wasn't direct, but I get what you're asking. I think I get what you're asking. So when you register, it says, don't count yourself in yet because humans are going to look at this, right? So don't book your flights, all that good stuff. But maybe you got a special code from somebody that gets you like an express pass at Disney World or something like that. Go straight to the front of the line. I don't have any of those. I wish I did. If I did, I'd give them all to you guys, but I don't. But register, just fill out your information. Like they ask you things like, what company do you work for? Fill that sort of stuff out because that's going to have some weight, no doubt. Like I'm sure they ask you why you care about AI, like what you're doing with it, stuff like that. Fill all that stuff out, make it interesting, and good luck. So it's like the lottery, I guess. But definitely check that out. The other thing I was going to say is. We want cool content and sessions. Mike did a great job tonight. We want more cool content and sessions. So if you have ideas for content, please, even if you don't want to present, we've had some great submissions, by the way, in the CFP, and so we are considering those going forward. We have Mike here in August. We have a presenter already for September. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you have other ideas for content, even if you're not the speaker, submit them. Maybe we can find a speaker. And if you have suggestions for people that you think might be a good speaker, submit that too. We'd love to entertain that. And then there's a CFP at Sessionize that you can submit sessions. And some of you have already done that, which is fantastic. So we'd love to have cool sessions here. Yeah?
I'd love to see a presentation on Purview and preparing for Copilot.
Purview preparing for Copilot. Sounds like governance and like, ugh. But I get it. It's important stuff, right? All right. It's not the exciting, like, let's build AI agents sort of stuff, but I get it. So governance is important. Data governance is important. And so I think that's a fantastic session because the Purview thing, honestly, is like this mystical thing for a lot of people. Like, not a lot of people talk about it, and we know it's all out there, and we know what it does, but not a lot of people talk about it and show it off. So I think that'd be great. So we'll take note of that. Mike, I'll let you... Since this is your space, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So Microsoft Purview is a data governance tool that Microsoft has. It sort of covers both the Microsoft 365 side of the data world as well as Microsoft Fabric from a structured data world. Really, the question I believe that you're seeking the answer to is, I'm going to enable Copilot in my organization, how do I know that it doesn't have access to data that I don't want people to ask questions of and then answer because it's not been secured, it's not been locked down. Security might be through obfuscation where it's given access to everybody, but people didn't know that the spreadsheet with salary information existed, and then Copilot scans all that and then asks a question, you know, what does my boss make?
Question in one of these events that I was doing about going into and figuring out, some
Yeah.
delicate information.
Yeah.
Salary,
drive or
insurance,
Yeah.
W-2s.
I mean, there's some built in. I mean, if you have permission to it, there's things that are built in there, but it's certainly possible that, or excuse me, the concern would be if you don't have good governance practices in your repositories, SharePoint being one of the big repositories from a Copilot perspective, you know, you want to make sure that you are understanding what you're giving access to, and Purview can help with that. So. And it then extends into, as we saw a little bit today, into Microsoft Fabric as well from more of a structured data perspective.
Does it actually redact some of the information and sees the social security number it will automatically?
My understanding is it's limited into what users should be allowed to see things with those sensitivity things. Like, you know, are you in HR, whatever,
Right.
accounting.
Oh, based on the profile of the person.
That can discover patterns, so it can look through like credit card or social security.
Right.
And maybe some people in the organization should be able to see that, maybe some people shouldn't. Maybe this should be allowed, period.
So sensitivity labels, maybe identifying something that might be PII and so on, these sorts of things. And then depending on where the data is, as far as there are different ways of doing data masking. So you might, when you say redacted, it's not going to be, as far as I understand, not going into a document and redacting that in the document if somebody were to see it. But certainly there are ways of doing data masking depending on where the data source is from that perspective. But yeah, sensitivity labels, identifying who has access to what, probably some of the more critical things. So that's kind of a general idea of making your data available or ready for Copilot within an organization. You want to leverage something like Purview for that.
I'm trying to encourage organizations to adopt, Copilot and AI, but then also to prepare themselves for that worst case scenario where there's some data that gets out that you don't want it to. So,
Right. Yeah. No, that could be a great topic.
No, this is a very good topic actually. This
Make
came
it-
up and
Make it fun.
Yeah,
You
make governance fun.
Make governance fun. That'll be the title of this session, huh, David?
Yeah.
Make governance fun
Yeah. Good.
with pizza.
Good luck. Yeah, with pizza, right? So we have a session for next month as well. It's a connection that David has, which is great because it sounds super interesting. I don't know if I mentioned it last time I was here, but one of the conferences that I love are DEF CON style conferences. One of my favorites is in Milwaukee in the spring, in like April, called CypherCon. DEF CON's going on right now in Vegas. Jason Street's actually at DEF CON in Vegas, but he'll be in town for another cybersecurity conference, and so he's going to come speak at our user group on cybersecurity on Thursday, September 4th, and so you can go register for that. It'll be right here, all that good stuff. Yeah.
I don't have this abstract test, but I'll post that on the meetup site as soon as I do. And Jason, I met him in Transylvania. He's from Oklahoma, but highly advanced speaker. There's a lot of white hat hacking, and he talks a lot about that. So I hope you tell the stories.
Which is great. Yeah, I love this space a lot. So, so with that, is there anything else we need to mention? Come back September?
First of all, I want to thank Ron.
Yeah.
Recording this and live streaming right now. Thank you so much for doing this. I thank my friend Jack, who works for McDonald's headquarters. He's not a fraud, but he actually works for that. He donated some of these things here that have your giveaway. If anybody wants to do a basketball fan, you probably are aware of McDonald's All-American Game is the number one high school all-star tournament in the country. It'll be Team East.
Nice.
He actually climbed up on the lamppost and came down.
I was really hoping they were like certificates for Grimace Shakes for life or something, but better luck next time or something. I don't know.
I don't know if I have a Guinness banner for this.
Low expectations now.
Then there's some pizza left.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
Just, you don't have to wipe down your tables, but please clean up the big stuff, your cups and yours, because that's just supposed to be made a little bit easier on the kids.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. Like, feel free to hang out for a little bit, chat with folks in the room, get to know folks, and yeah, eat some more pizza and salad. Eat a lot of salad because we have a lot of salad left, and there's also cookies and brownies. And those brownies, if you didn't have one, they are like gooey on the inside. They are just fantastic. So dangerously good. Like, I think there's like chocolate chips like embedded in there too, or something. I ran into a couple of those. So definitely check that out. And we'll see you again next time. Thanks so much.
Mike, I had a quick question actually.
Huh?
So in your previous slide,
Uh-huh.
there was a flow sort of thing there. Is that an orchestration flow you can do?
Oh, yeah. Let me bring that back up.
Yeah, an official piece of basketball merchandise.
This one?
No, in the demo that you were showing, right, you had a workspace, and there was a workflow button or something.
Oh, the task flow.
Yes.
Oh,
So green, which you didn't click on.
oops. Let me find my mouse here.
Yeah, that one, yeah.
Yeah, so this one, and then here, if you went to, well, here, let me just do it here. So,
So it's a way of orchestrating something?
yeah. But think of it more as like like a task flow, not like an ETL pipeline type of thing. Like you want certain things